welcome back to another little episode, a nice little chat. Today we obviously have I have Robbie with me, but we're more than happy and delighted to welcome Drew, who joins us from America, who is enjoying his lunchtime while we're sitting here in the evening. And he is a detransitioner and has got a really interesting story to tell us. And so I'm going to allow Drew to tell us his tale, tell us how he wants to introduce himself, because that's your story to tell. So Drew, over to you. Welcome. You're very, very welcome today to two Scots, you know.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be able to share, so thank you. So I guess just getting right into it, as I was said, my name is Drew. I'm currently at university studying human biology, and yeah, I'm a detransitioner, and I kind of have a gender critical view of things. So just kind of going into what led me to transition. Throughout my entire childhood, I had very gender non-conforming behavior. My mom recalls sometimes like having to take me out of the dress to leave the house because I just wanted to play around in dresses. I have always been outwardly effeminate. I would, have my nails painted to school, go to school with my nails painted. In the fourth grade, I would do eyeliner and straighten my hair every single day. So just kind of beating a dead bush here, but very gender non-conforming behavior from a very young age. I never really felt it was a problem as a kid. It was just kind of something that was always there. It was always part of me. Of course, like I said, there were some issues with my mom fearing because, I grew up in California, and especially in Southern California. So, it's a very liberal area, but we did live in a more conservative suburb. So there was always kind of a fear, for my parents who are lesbians themselves,
Right.
because, they grew up in the 60s, and, back then, just being gay was, offensive enough. So then for them to have a child like me who kind of, not only is clearly maybe homosexual, but also very gender non-conforming, I don't blame my mother for wanting to take me out of a dress before leaving the house, because that was, of course, like out of, her fear for my safety and her fear for my assimilation and with my peers. So, there's no resentment there. I just brought that up as a point as to how maybe that could have caused me to, have certain feelings later in life. I had my first relationship at age 10 with another boy at school. It was very innocent, but so I never really, I say that because I never really was in the closet. It was always very obvious that I'm either, gay, or people even would mistake me for a female. In the fifth grade, I had some friends who, I went by Andrew back then, so I had a very male name. But people still were like, why is they would see me go into the boys' bathroom and be like, oh, why is she going in there? So, just gender nonconformity all throughout my upbringing. So I get to high school. My freshman year of high school was 2015. So that was about the time that Caitlyn Jenner announced that Caitlyn was going to transition. And also I Am Jazz, the show, premiered around 2015. I'm not sure if it's exactly 2015, the same year, but around then too. So at that time, I kind of, I looked at that and I was like, holy bleep. Like, I was like, holy, sorry, am I allowed to swear on here or no?
Well, it's been done before.
Okay.
I hold the record, so you
Robbie
go ahead.
bank on that one, yeah. But the
Okay.
2015, that period, 2014, 2015 was a big period of a surge. So yeah, carry on.
Yeah. And so that being said, I'll try to refrain from swearing, but I was like, holy cow, like that's me. I saw that. I was like, to see Caitlyn Jenner, someone who was previously so outwardly masculine, then do this, I was like, well, I've been behaving how he's now behaving my whole life. You know what I mean? So it was very kind of like, for me to be 14 years old and to see that, I was like, that's possible. That's a thing people do. I was like, okay. So around that time, I had been getting bullied pretty severely in school, physical and verbal. I mean, not super bad physically. I would get like shoved into fences and things like that, but I never really gotten like badly beaten up. And just the verbal abuse was like every single day. And so when I saw this, I was like, is that something that could save me? Is that something that could lead me out of here? So I was around 14 and I talked to my mom and I said, like, I think that's me. I think I need to do that. And she, she wasn't surprised. Obviously, she'd known me my whole life, but I remember she came at me and she said, are you sure? Like, because she herself was very gender nonconforming in her early years. She's gay. And in her 20s, if I see photos of her in her 20s from the 80s, and she looks like a trans man. Like she's wearing, like a collared shirt, blazer, like men's clothing. Her hair is like even shorter than mine is right now. She looks like what you would call in 2022 a trans man. And so I understand, in hindsight, why, when her very gender nonconforming son is coming to her and saying, I'm trans, like these people I see on TV, why she would question that. Because I think she put herself in my shoes and said, yeah, I probably would have been trans too, So she questioned me, but I still persisted. I was like, let's schedule the appointment. I want to go to the doctor. I need this. And so we had an appointment scheduled. I was 14, so I don't have a super concise memory of this, but I think we were about like 2 weeks out from the appointment date, or, the appointment date was approaching. My mom asked me again, she said, are you sure you want to do this? Because once we go there, things are going to start, it's going to get serious, because I think she was researching into it and realizing how quickly children get prescribed hormones or blockers. She kind of kept on asking me as it got closer and closer. And at one point I said, what, I'm not sure. and I said, I'm not sure. And so we canceled it. And to this day, I think about that, because sometimes when I'm down, I think, maybe I should have done it. Maybe I should have done it back then. Maybe my life would have been easier. But most days I'm like, thank God I didn't do that, because today I really value my health. I think with everything that's going on right now in the world, it's important for us to really value our health and really kind of put that, regardless, kind of going on a tangent there, but
I think it's really important. Yeah, no, carry on.
But then I went through my teen years. I continued through high school, continued to be gender nonconforming. I was the only boy on my school's cheer team. I would wear makeup to school, women's clothes to school. And then around the age 16, I was still kind of dysphoric, as you would call it, or just kind of confused about my gender, as I was when I was 14. And I developed anorexia pretty bad. I lost, maybe, I want to say 70 pounds or more in under a year. And I kind of tie that in with dysphoria, because I was going through puberty, and I wanted to control other people's perception of me. And I was already wearing feminine clothes and doing makeup and stuff. And I thought, well, if I make myself smaller, maybe I'll look more female, and so that was pretty bad. But my mom got me treatment for that. She pulled me out of school in my senior year when I was about 17, got me treatment for that. And so I've been in recovery for, I'm 21 now. So it's been about 4 years. Yeah. So I've struggled with an eating disorder because of my gender confusion. And, so that's just kind of like a little summary of how that kind of affected my life, through high school and stuff. Let's see. So I get to college, right? So I get to college. This is in 2019, right before the lovely pandemic. So I kind of, like I said, I kind of had some trauma with bullying in my upbringing. And so going to college, I kind of felt like I could reinvent myself a little bit. And so when I went to college, this was right after the eating disorder treatment. So my body had, in my eyes at least, become more masculine, because I wasn't, starving myself as I was. But and I say in my eyes because I understand that obviously, like, I don't believe that making myself look smaller is going to make people think I'm female or look more female, you know, but that was my thinking at the time. Then going into college, I thought I could really reinvent myself, you know, moving out of town my first year. And so I actually started presenting a lot more masculinely than I ever had in my life when I went to college, because I think in my head, it was like I had gotten treatment for the eating disorder. I didn't feel as confident, you know, doing my makeup anymore because, you know, I just felt like I had become more masculinized, and I thought, you know, why not just try being more masculine? And I did, and I struggled. I mean, it was one of the best years of my life, moving away and going to school, but it also like kind of like butching up, as we would say in my community, like didn't work for me. I just kind of felt, if anything, it made me a bit more dysphoric. And so yeah, and I bring that in there because I think that's actually kind of what drove me into transition my sophomore and junior year of college, because I kind of had gone through this phase of being outwardly feminine and very like that my whole life. And then I go to college and I want to reinvent myself and kind of maybe escape some of the ostracization I felt as a kid. And so I changed my appearance to look, you know, more straight passing or less, you know, obviously gay. And you know, it didn't work. That happened. I went to college. I started acting more masculine. I started lifting weights too. I kind of wanted to prove something to like my high school bullies or something, like, look, you know, look, I'm man enough now or something. Yeah. So then the pandemic hit. They sent us all home. I had some more time. And so I also took up modeling because I was like, okay, well, I've been butching it up, like lifting weights, whatever. And so I decided I would model, and I started getting into that. And the reason I bring that up is because anyone who knows anything about the modeling industry is that you face a lot of rejection. And so it can really shoot your self-esteem to the floor. And a lot of, you know, I've talked with Robbie about this before. A lot of models I know like have just zero self-esteem and just an extremely distorted self-image. Yeah, I bring that up because I think that's also another thing that drove me into transition, was how shot to the floor my self-esteem was at that time in my life. And, you know, also trying to be more masculine, which is just something that is not necessarily going to come naturally to me. I think both of those things made me feel like really out of touch with myself, which is why transition was something that was so appealing. It was like, I think that's a general thing with gay and gender non-conforming people, is that there's always something we need to change about ourselves, whether it's like to do with something as simple as grooming, removal of body hair, or like something as far as that, or how we act in social situations, how we present ourselves, how we carry ourselves, how we walk, how we talk. Like there's always kind of this feeling that there's something we need to either play up or play down, or, you know, alter to, you know, just kind of fit whatever preconceived notion we have of what people will expect from us. You know, the accumulation of all these things, of moving away and trying to kind of create this more masculine persona for myself to, you know, prove whatever. And then getting into modeling and meeting people in that industry who were trans and who were, you know, because in LA and in that scene, there's a lot of, you know, gay and trans people. And yeah, I had my self-esteem kind of shot to the floor. I also, during the kind of modeling era that I had, I became really close with a trans woman who was about 10 to 12 years older than me. Looking back, it's really not like, it was a really kind of bad relationship. But one day I remember I showed up to her place and I was wearing a dress, and she looked at me and said, or he, you know, I'm saying she, but this is a trans woman. So but she looked at me and she goes, "That's not a man." Because I wore a dress to her house. And I was like, and then at the time I just kind of laughed it off. But looking back, I'm like, that really, I think, shot me into this kind of, I internalized that, because here I had a childhood of people, you know, saying, "Oh, are you a boy or a girl?" Or kids bullying me and telling me to leave the boys' locker room and go change in the girls' locker room. And now I'm an adult and I'm finally trying to like get out of this. I got recovery from my eating disorder. I'm trying to like find, you know, where I'm going to fit in as an adult. And then I have this trans woman who I look up to, who's older than me and in this industry. And she looks at me as a man, or I was 18, so I don't know if you call it a man or a boy, but and I was wearing a dress, and she said, "That's not a man." And so I think that I bring that up because it's like, how reductive is that to say that, like, and if you want to talk about grooming, you know, like, to tell a young person that because of the clothes they wear, they are not what they physiologically are, is like very destabilizing, I think. And just that little seed like being planted, I think, really made me begin to question myself. And really, yeah, especially because at the time I was really trying to play up my masculinity, or before that, you know, and then wearing a dress to my friend's house is not necessarily playing up masculinity, but you know, that kind of shot me into this spiral, I would say. Anyways, this all happened in the summer after the pandemic hit. I go back up to school. I'm living with, you know, my college roommates. I really struggled during this time with some substance use, and, you know, a lot of people suffered during this time, but it kind of, you know, was the perfect storm for me because yeah, I had this modeling contract and it was not going as planned. And so my self-esteem was to the ground. I had this friend who was trans and much older than me, putting their very like rigid view of what a man and a woman is. Like, it's like, it's supposed to be inclusive. It's supposed to be accepting. It's supposed to be all this. But then, like, here's this trans woman telling me that I'm not a man because of my behavior and because I'm in a dress. It's like, okay, maybe that's what you believe for yourself. Maybe that's what you tell yourself as to why, you know, you are in the position you are today. But to put that on somebody else, especially somebody like a decade younger than you, no. How is that? Who's that helping? You know, that might help you with your rationalization of why you're 8 years or however far you into transition. But that's completely backwards to say that to a gay person or to a gender non-conforming person, to put a label on them. It's like, that's what people like us are kind of have happened to us our whole life, is we have people, straight people or other gay people, like putting labels on us, calling us different things, calling us, you know, slurs, or the opposite sex, or, you know, whatever. So then for you to just perpetuate that, it's like, that reminds me of the whole idea of like, well, people who are abused then perpetuate that abuse upon others. It's like, getting on. I'm sorry, I'm kind of taking a while here.
No, I think as well, just to kind of chime in there, Drew, I think it's really interesting as well that they actually know what the label is, because we constantly hear from people regarding this that, you know, oh, well, there's a beauty in gender non-conformity. But isn't it interesting that there is actual no gender non-conformity with these people? Because the moment you non-conform, you become the sex of the non-conforming behavior. That's what really strikes me. And again, it also comes right down to the point of, you know, if we're sitting here, these are the people that say, oh, well, there's, I don't know how many genders now, but repeatedly, how did this woman not know that you were in her scheme or intellectual schema? How did she not know you were non-binary? You know, this is the thing,
right.
You know, sitting here talking about this stuff. How is it that these people know? What was it they say? I think it's my favorite one is where they say, intellectually, no one knows you better than you know yourself. Well, aside from abolishing the entire field of psychoanalysis, which is quite frankly hilarious, you know, the idea that they can then, however, say, well, you're a trans woman because you wear a dress, is a very interesting element to this discussion. I think as well, when you reference it, you're not under, because I know you're saying, well, this is just something that happened. It's not just something that happened, it's something that was, I think, calculated as well. And I think that's something we see often as well, is someone coming in and saying, you are this because you look different. And when you have entire groups of society telling you that, I think it isn't necessarily unreasonable that people feel that they really could potentially change. That's the big problem here. That, well, if people are telling me, you know, I'm a girl, or they see a girl when I wear the dress, to already vulnerable people, do they believe that there is actually going to be a girl seen when they wear the dress? Especially, you know, say we're taking in that example, it's a man. But I think that's a very valid point. Isla, what do you think on that? Because I know that that's something you often think about in schools.
I think there is a huge amount of grooming, isn't there? It's like this an immediate switch, and I can see the culmination of these pressures that came upon you through like a whole multitude of different issues that you were facing, from, you know, the various mental health issues, you know, the youth. I mean, you're still very young. You were obviously still trying to find yourself, but this sort of backlog, and then you know, you meet these people who basically just immediately sort of transferred you, rerouted you down this pathway. And I can just see how it happened. I mean, I presume you probably also spent a bit of time on the internet during this whole COVID experience as well, did you? When you were,
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like? Did that have any impact?
I mean, yeah. So I think when the pandemic hit, not just for trans people, but for everyone, it gave everyone a lot more time with their phone, a lot more screen time, a lot more time to, quite frankly, participate in narcissistic behavior. Like, and I mean, I think this especially maybe impacted the LGBT community, but I think just everyone in general. I mean, you're inside, have your phones, you have your selfie camera, you have your mirrors, you have, you know, all these more opportunities to ruminate about your physical appearance and all this stuff. And so as far as the internet's influence during that time, I've always kind of followed trans people online just because as a gender nonconforming person, like I see myself as just a feminine male. And so I'm gonna like, I feel like my whole life I've just kind of watched other feminine males online, you know, because that's what I relate to. And so I wouldn't say there was necessarily a change in the type of content I was viewing that during that time. But what it was for me more, I think, was I was doing modeling and I was doing school remotely. And so there was a lot more opportunity for me to focus on my self-image and compare myself to other models I saw online, other, you know, people like me I saw online. So, and then, you know, there's of course the what infamous Reddit chronicles of trans people of how you're,
yeah,
you know, you're kind of exposed to these ideas, and then you know, you Google something, or is it normal to, you know, feel this way as a guy? You know what I mean? Things like that, where you start to kind of question, you know, I think.
Well, it's
Definitely.
Bader Meinhof, isn't it, as well? Because what it is, it's essentially a form of cold reading. Because what is done is essentially they'll say to people, oh, have you noticed that, you know, growing up you were asked if you were a boy and a girl? And then you notice it more and more and more and more. And part of this is about raising behaviors so that people actually remember that and then look out for them performing that behavior. And then they'll perform the behavior because they've always done it anyway. And then they'll go, ah, look, I'm trans. That's part of it. It's part of that reinforcement via cold reading. And it really is just Bader Meinhof. I think that's something that's really important to kind of to remember here when we're looking at a lot of this stuff. And it's quite a cynical tactic, to be honest, because it's not holistically sitting down and giving someone, you know, genuine care and analysis about who they are. It's actually simply going, you think you are this because you've done these 3 things in the last week. Now think about how many times you do it again. Because obviously if you know something, you're more likely to notice that you're doing it. That's the thing. If you're self-conscious, again, wanting people to be self-conscious falls into all of this, you then notice that it's happening more and more and more. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, and in particular, because we're coming up, I think, to the moment where you go on to transition, and it's something obviously you could include in that bit, was I just want to know how much you were told about the side effects of transitioning at the time, or if you were told.
So most of the information that I gathered about what the side effects of estrogen and spironolactone were from the internet. Because I actually got skipping ahead a little bit. When I did get on hormones, when I went about that process, I first tried to go through my primary health care provider here in San Diego, as opposed to when I was at school up north. And that was kind of confusing. And so I ultimately just got on a little plan that my school offers, which requires that I just go to my school's clinic. And so I went for one appointment. This is like the what's it called? The trademark of all this is you go in one appointment and you get that prescription. Like, so the provider that I went to at my school's, at my University of California healthcare office, I had one visit, you know, and I could tell the physician was very nervous. And I think it's important to include this because well, in recent years, I kind of personally really dislike doctors in that profession. I think it's somewhat whatever, but that's besides the point. I think I could tell that she was very nervous because, you know, she was just kind of like, you know, her eyebrows were really raised and she was just like, okay, like kind of breathy, like just, you know, not, because they can't say anything. They can't question. They can't say, well, have you been seeking therapy?
Mm.
It's all, you know, the affirmative model. It's all.
And were you ever asked at any point about your, because I'm not sure if it would be the same, but were you ever asked at any point about previous conditions? So for example, Anna or anything?
No. No, I was never asked about anorexia. I was never asked about depression. I was never asked about OCD. No. I did, you know, all I did was I had to come to the first appointment with, you know, the informed consent forms ready to go. I did read those. I did, you know, read the blood thinning effects, the, you know, increased chance of clotting. So I was aware of what I was getting into, you know, relatively with the informed consent paperwork.
And
you know, I know that.
How old were you at this point, Drew? Were you 19 or something?
Yeah, so COVID, they sent me home. I, you know, made these friends. I was doing modeling and stuff. I was 18, and that summer I turned 19. Yeah, it was a very quick process. I and I was on the phone with somebody. It was actually a trans man I was on the phone with, who I was talking to, who's my case manager. And they said, you know, like, maybe you should talk to a therapist first, because you'd be surprised at how fast the hormones are prescribed once you go in. This was a trans person telling me this. And at the time I was so distraught. I was like, give me the pills, you know, like, and, you know, unfortunately that's how a lot of people go into it, is, you know, we are socially ostracized because of our gender nonconformity to some degree. A lot of us struggle with depression, OCD, anxiety. And, you know, so then when we're kind of introduced to this ideology where there's this medication that you can take, that, you know, oh, over time you'll physically transform and you'll start to notice you get treated differently and all this stuff. And, you know, regardless of whether or not that happened for me, it's like, no wonder people are in such a rush to, like I said, just give me the pills, like, because
what was your fantasy about that? What did you think would change in terms of
Also, just
pills?
I agree with that question. Just to kind of also cut in here as well, I think it's very interesting about the full warning as well, because I actually think that wasn't a warning at all. I think that was, as you know, what you're saying is, if you want anyone to do something, you know, you go, oh, you know, you better come down quick and buy this because a lot of other people are looking at it. It seems to me to be a false warning. It seems to me to be a way to just tell you, oh, are you sure? Because, you know, you get the pills very quickly. It seems to me to be coded actual language to try and rope you in. Just from that's kind of cynical observation, but I totally agree with Isla's question as well.
So what was my like fantasy, or what was my like what was the drive?
What would, when you were going into it, what were you thinking how would it be better for you? What were you
what was the desired goal, really?
Yeah, what were you thinking would change?
So here's how I look at it. I think in this model of calling it trans healthcare, it's saying that there's an illness present. Okay. And so what's the illness here? The illness here is gender or sex nonconformity. Okay. So that statement alone right there, you know, is how it's blatantly kind of homophobic. But just to say that gender and sex nonconformity is the illness that you're treating, it's like, how is that celebrating your true self then? Okay. Anyways, so what my fantasy was, I guess, or what my goal in taking the hormones was that I felt a lot of my ostracization and consequently a lot of my mental distress in my early childhood and throughout my life was due to the fact that I was a male that did not behave like a male. And so my goal in taking the hormones was to have the outside world perceive me as conforming and perceive me as a female, because that's how I act anyway. And a lot of the issues in my life right now, if I feel socially ostracized, if I feel, it also tied into the whole body dysmorphia thing, because I thought, oh, no wonder I was anorexic, because I'm in the wrong body. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no wonder because you know, I'm 6'3" and I had broad shoulders. Like, you know what I mean? So it was like, well, that's why I'm anorexic, because I'm in the body of a man, and female bodies are smaller than male bodies. So it all makes sense, you know? So it's just kind of,
it was a new beginning for everything. You would, maybe things would go away, like the bullying and the difficulties that you were having. It would be a fresh start.
yeah. And you know, it honestly did, because but I don't mean that as in it worked. I mean that as in, at my university. So I live in the Bay Area of California, and I go to a University of California, and like, so there's a very common like way of thinking up there. And I think, and just in the town, it's very, very liberal. So much so to like, when I first started socially transitioning and just wearing female clothes every single day, as opposed to just like, that's the thing, is I even now, like I dress like this, like it's no big deal, but back then it was a big deal, because it was like I was committed to it, you know, and specifically like trying to look more female every day. So but you know what would happen is, I just noticed like everyone would be like, oh, you're so brave, or oh, you know, like I think that's a kind of a common thing amongst people when they first start transition, is socially people are very in tune with it, because they're like, okay, this person is clearly trying to do something here. You know what I mean? That you see like a baby trans person, as you say, you know, they're going to be kind of paraded and celebrated in the street, because, you know, or at least that's what I felt in a very liberal time.
Drew, would you say that was out of them being true believers, or was it out of a culture of fear? Obviously, maybe that's not something you can answer, but just kind of in a general sense.
I think a lot of these people that give me those kind of crazy compliments of just like, oh, you're so stunning and brave and whatever, it's like, those people are fearful of being seen as bigoted. Like that's entirely where this is coming from, and it, you know, it actually happened 2 days ago. I was going on a walk with my friends, and I'm not transitioning anymore, but I still present femininely, I guess. And, you know, I had this guy who was on his bike, like with his girlfriend, and he just looks at me, and he doesn't even smile or anything. He just like shouts the word slay. And I was just kind of like, I think it's funny that people will very kind of forcefully give you a compliment, where it's like, it's almost like, oh, well, you might as well have called me like a slur. It's like,
This is a word that gay men use, isn't it? A slay.
yeah, slay is like a very common thing within.
I want to have sex with you or something, does it?
No,
no. It just means like, if you.
I'm booting the old one out of the chat. I'm getting slapped for that later. No, on a serious note, basically, it's to say slay. It's certainly in the UK. It comes from the drag scene as well, particularly.
Okay.
To slay is to look good, and it's to what they call serving.
You're serving, you're giving.
Yeah, so serving. You've heard that before, Isla. We know about that.
No, I've not heard serving.
So people would say, if you look good, they say you're serving looks, and looks would be spelled LEWKS. Don't you? We're not doing this. But the point is that this is what they do, and you'll often find it is very common. I mean, this is just reinforcing to me the idea that California needs to be jettisoned to,
you know, my kids,
some far off lunar colony, but like
my older kids are going to totally, you know, disown me now as well.
That's what you need to start doing is you need to start doing the whole "it's giving" thing as well, and then you'll be really down with the kids.
Yeah, anyway, we digress.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? So, what did it feel like when you started taking the hormones? Physically.
Sorry, I meant to say something else just about the
go for it.
The other thing really quick. So I think when people give you those kind of compliments that feel really forced, it's out of fear. Sorry if you can hear that in the background. It's out of fear of being seen as bigoted. So like, where you could just smile and pass and say, you know, maybe hello or whatever, they feel obligated, because they want to acknowledge your non-conformity, or they want to acknowledge your trans existence. And so then they're going to go out of their way to compliment you or to do something, but it never feels genuine. And you can ask anyone, even people who, you know, are trans and believe in the ideology to some extent, it never feels genuine when it's like, And so I guess what I'm saying is that almost feels like this kind of redirected, back in the day, maybe acknowledging someone's homosexuality would be calling them a dirty name or whatever. Now it seems to be, if you want to acknowledge somebody's non-conformity or somebody's, behavior, it's do it in the form of a compliment. And I think it's kind of sneaky in that way, that it's almost like just a redirection of homophobia in a way. But yeah, sorry. And then what was that? I just wanted to get that out. But what did you ask?
No, it's fine, because I think talking about the whole gender non-conformity is a huge thing that we will definitely have to tease out. Now, I was just wondering about what it felt like, when you first went on the hormones physically, what sort of how that impacted your body and how and physically as well, how did that go?
Yeah. So when I had been so I had been lifting weights and stuff, trying to get my whatever model body going before. And when you start taking the hormones, and when I started transitioning, I immediately so I'm saying this because I think there's multiple things involved. I started to change the kind of exercise I was doing at the same time. So I was doing a lot of cardio and stuff to try and make myself smaller again. And the reason I bring that up is because I think it's a placebo in a way. At first it's a placebo, because realistically, my first 2 weeks on estrogen and blockers, probably wasn't really going to feel anything. But in my head, because I was doing all these other things to kind of go with it, I was changing my exercise. I was probably restricting my calories and trying to be smaller. I was doing all these things that, were just more feminine in my mind at the time. I think initially that hit of gender euphoria you get when you're on the hormones is partly because you're taking them, and because they're very slowly starting to affect you. You do all these different behaviors along with it that kind of make it seem like more is happening than actually is. But I guess to answer your question as to when I actually really noticed changes starting to happen, the first thing I noticed was I was just tired. I would just get,
I hear that an awful lot. Yeah.
And that could have been because I think at the time I was relapsing with my eating disorder a little bit, so that could have been part of it. But what I noticed,
tiredness is a big thing.
Yeah, it's a massive side effect.
So I felt tired. I also sorry, loss of libido. Yeah. I experienced that. Not to be too graphic, but at one point you just completely become infertile. So
yeah, no, I like graphic. Do graphic.
Okay, well, you start shooting blanks at one point. Sorry. And yeah, I was tired. But it was worth it to me at the time. It was worth it because I felt, this is going to be something. It's like the classic, the hero's journey, or the tale of the hero's journey. It's a classic kind of example of that. You go through all this pain and treachery and hardship, but then in the end, you fix the problem at hand. You overcome. You're the hero. You're your own hero in this instance. So, at the time, any negative kind of side effects, I was just I wasn't dwelling on it really. All I was really focused on was, is my facial hair coming in slower? Is my body hair coming in slower? Are my nipples budding out? So I, you notice the tenderness in that area, loss of libido, like you said. What else? Hair growth minimally, skin softness. The reason I say it's almost a placebo is it's because it's you're worried about this hair growth and stuff, but it's I was constantly shaving my body. Every single day I was shaving everywhere, shaving my arms every single day, shaving my face every single day, putting on extra lotion than I ever had in my entire life. So it's how in the beginning, how much of it really is the hormones versus not. Now, I really did notice a difference when I got into the third month, because I had them doubling my dose each month.
Right.
Because I was I want to get this going. Some people go into it and they're kind of slow. They're like, I'm going to start at this dosage, or I'm going to start with just estrogen, no blocker. So, you know, this was my fault in retrospect. Like it was my fault that I was out having the doctor double my dose each month, because I think doing that, you know, just really, you know, made me feel more ill than I would have otherwise. So yeah, I think at one point I got up to like 6 milligrams of estradiol a day, and 100 or 150, just way too much spironolactone. And at that point it was like brain fog central. And when I say brain fog, it's like, it's just brain fog. I don't know how else to describe it. Like you're quite literally
Not a nice drug. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's not a nice
drug.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I especially noticed that with the spironolactone, with the blocker. That was the thing that's the thing that causes it's a diuretic, I think. So it would cause like frequent urination, and just because at one point during my transition I continued just estrogen but didn't get back on the blocker, because I hated how the blocker made me feel. And that was actually a lot more, you know, peaceful, I guess to say, is the blockers are very I would just randomly get, and this could have been the estrogen too, but I would randomly get headaches. Like it was just kind of, it didn't feel great, but it was all worth it to me at the time, because I was like, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to live. This is what's going to save me. So yeah, you know, so I guess.
What was the turning point then that made you go, I can't do this now. I'm gonna detransition?
Yeah, so this was the summer of, I started socially transitioning in like spring of 2021. Started hormones very shortly after, like within like I think less than a month after coming out socially. Or no, when I came out on social media, I had already been on them for a few weeks. So, but I had been, you know, presenting feminine for, I don't know, it's funny because I feel like I've always just kind of, by some people's terms, I've kind of always been trans just based on how I dress, you know, sometimes it's like, whatever. But the turning point was, so I started in April. I was on them consistently for like 4 to 5 months. Once I hit like the 4-month mark, it's like, I think it was once I hit like 4 months on hormones and I was on like 6 milligrams and like 100 something of spironolactone. I was like, holy shit, this is hurting me. Sorry for cussing. But that's when I started like taking them more sporadically, kind of like I just started like kind of self-administering a dose that would be more bearable. And so then for the next year, I was off and on, you know, just kind of self-administering it. The turning point is, you know, like I said, when the pandemic hit and we had a lot more time to spend just focused on ourselves, looking inward, that really continued for me with the whole transition, because it's like every day you wake up and you try to, I would shave, I would do makeup, I would, you know, anything to try and look more female going out. And I relapsed on my eating disorder and all this stuff. So the turning point for me was, and the reason I say this is because you're looking a lot more inward. I also started to consume content of detransition people, because I got to a point where I was like, how is this helping me? Is this truly helping me? I got to a point because it was kind of all fun and games. I was kind of just living in my own fantasy land in my head for the first like 4 months, until I got to that point where I was like, okay, these pills are really getting to me. And then I thought like, okay, if I feel like this medication is taking a toll on my health, who is this helping? Because if I'm taking the medication to change outwardly people's perception of me, but it's physically harming me to do so, then am I helping myself, or am I helping people who don't understand who I am? You know what I mean? And so I then kind of started questioning it. So I started getting on the Reddit I kind of, not detrans Reddit, but just trans Reddit. And I was like, you know, trying to see like, who, does anybody else like have to take a break from their hormones, or any, like, you know, because it was kind of getting too intense for me at one point with the blockers. And So I just kind of got into that realm of people discussing hormone doses on Reddit and people online just kind of talking about, yeah. So the turning point for me was kind of realizing like, no, transition is conformity. For me, I felt like transitioning was not liberating me from, you know, anything really. I kind of at one point felt like I had imprisoned myself, because it's like, okay, I've given myself new rules as how I'm going to live, and I've taken this medication, and that's when, you know, the religion, I guess, if we want to call it a religion, stopped working for me. It was because it got to a point of like, you know, this isn't as, I don't know. It just who is, I just kept on asking that question of who is this helping? Because I felt myself becoming more physically negatively impacted by the blockers. And I was like, I don't
It
feel,
wasn't solving your feelings, or your
no, nothing,
weren't reborn, were you? Essentially,
no.
it just added in more problems.
And it made me realize that fixating on external things, or fixating on material things, fixating on, you know, anything really materialism, like anything in our material reality, fixating on that is not going to bring you peace. It's going to cause you more distress. And that's when I got to a point where I was like, I'm spending all this time so focused on these physical things about myself and about the world, and this isn't making me a better person.
There's I think there's a relationship here, because essentially what you've got is an internal locus of control, because the eating disorder and the trans identification are both about trying to control your internal environment, because there's facets in your external environment that you don't feel that you're in control of. And so basically the way to look is inward and try to micromanage your internal environment. And that's effectively what you did with your eating disorder and all of the different, you know, changing, but, you know, this fantasy of becoming a female. And essentially it didn't actually change what it was you wanted to change. But, you know, you found that out. You still felt, and you weren't actually born again. You still had those issues. You still had the problems.
Yeah, and I wasn't even that into it. Like I remember I'd have discussions with my sister where I would just kind of be discussing like the nuance of transition and all of it, and she would say things, well, if you're female, and then at one point I kind of would correct her. I'm like, I'm never gonna be female. I'm not female. Like I never really believed like that. I always knew, I was like, I'm always gonna be male. I was born male, I'll die male. Like for me, it was never like, oh, I'm gonna, you know. I felt like even when I was deep in it, when I was like deep in the, you know, this is what's going to save me, headspace, you know, it's also because I have lesbian moms and I have an older sister and I've had exclusively female friends growing up. It's like, I feel like I've always really looked up to women. I never thought I was a woman, you know. I thought that the way people perceived me as a feminine male was very negative, and that if I assimilated into society just as someone who appeared female or appeared as a woman, that was what I wanted to do. But I never, even when I was in the thick of it, I never was like, oh, I am a woman. And that's something I think we need to make a distinction within the community, like just moving forward, is like, stop saying you're a woman like any other woman is a woman. Yes, you may appear as a woman, but you are a trans woman. And to say that you're a woman is also to reduce your own experience down, like is to erase your transness in some way. You know what I mean? Like if you were to say, oh, I'm a woman, but you're a trans woman, it's like, well, isn't that not the point? Aren't you proud as a, like, I don't know if that makes sense, but just
I'm going to come in and be a really nasty rad femme here. And I'm just going to say, from a basic point of it, if that's the basic schema, because I agree with you, what you're essentially saying is, if you're saying trans, then how can you be a woman? Because the entire point of trans as an acronym devalues. It's almost as if I would say it's almost the word not in front of women, in a way, if we're thinking about it. Because what it's coding is, it's not. Trans women, not women, in a way. But what I think is, from my perspective, and this is me personally talking, I think it just really highlights for me that you never really can be female. And obviously, I am all for people living the way they personally want to live, in terms of, people can, in their lives, dress how they want, look how they want, act how they want, do what they want. The problem for me comes when these people are actually claiming we are women, because I don't think you ever can be, and I think that's part of the issue. And I think that when we say the term trans, what do we actually mean by that? Because even you here are sitting here, and yourself, even when you were saying, when I was deep in this, it was going to save me, you didn't even really think that.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm just thinking, because what I think is becoming apparent for me here is that, in my view, I don't really think, and this comes as a kind of hardline view, and I don't apologize for it, because it's me. I just don't think, as a concept, trans is coherent. I'm afraid at this stage, that's just, that's honestly my opinion. I just don't think it's coherent at this stage, because at what point can you genuinely become it? Because, at what line, for what people, do people genuinely cross that threshold? And I think at that point, if you're conceding, you'll never cross that threshold, then I think what we could call an endocrinological experiment isn't going to end up with that result. And that's what really concerns me, in a way, because I think that, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who need a lot of serious, considerable help on this. Like, I'm talking serious help. So, for example, if I was sitting you down and you'd come to me, say, the first time or the second time, with various, and I don't want to say this in a cruel way, but comorbidities, just as they are, if you were sitting down with me, I think you go to a psychologist first. To be perfectly honest, that's, if a child like that presented, that's what I would do. And I think that that's becoming apparent on that. And I think it's, for me, I think when I see that, it's always, and Isla can probably comment on this better than me, because it's more her field than mine. Every time I discuss this, I see more and more children coming at it with comorbidity. And it seems to me that trans is a symptom rather than actually a cause. And actually, I wouldn't necessarily even say it's a symptom. It seems to be a product that's offered as a potential solution to other issues.
I was wondering if you had friends like Robbie at the time when you were at that age, some gender non-conforming gay male friends. Do you think you might have taken a different avenue as
at the age when I was 14 and was going to go on puberty blockers, or younger, or
I don't know, wherever along the journey, if you had like if there was quite a few of them who'd been strong, because one of the things,
or even just male friends as well, who were not persecuting you, to be
because there's not a space, is there, for in this society generally for gay men to be accepted for being gender non-conforming, despite the fact I hate the word gender, but you know what I mean. We're using it as an because people know what we mean. I mean, both of you probably take a lot of flack for presenting in the way that you do. I mean, I see it all the time. Robbie, he's constantly getting picked on for his hair and his presentation, etc. I'm sure you do too. And then now there's this automatic trajectory towards trans if you're basically want to be a gay male presenting in this. And similarly, you mentioned about your mothers, and that's exactly what it was like when I was growing up. When I was similar age, I had a shaved head and massive Dr. Martin boots. You might find that very hard to believe, but it is actually true. And I was very gender non-conforming also, and would be described as a butch lesbian. So, but now, of course, there isn't this space for young LGB people to do that, as much, because they are literally thrown off down this path. So I was just wondering, you know, if would it have been different if you'd have had that?
Yeah, so despite having a boyfriend in 5th grade at age 10, I was quite not not interested in having gay friends or having gender non-conforming friends or even having male friends, because I think there's a number of things at play. I think one, growing up in a home with only females and only having female friends, again, I don't blame I think my parents raised me amazing. I don't, this is not putting any blame on anyone else, but I'm just saying, I think fact of the matter, this is kind of what contributed to it. I had a very distant relationship to other males. We had family friends, and I've had family of, you know, I had a grandpa, I had an uncle, I had, you know, younger male friends when I was younger too, but in general, I felt very distant to other males. And so another thing was, you know, some of my first interactions with other males were just negative because they only wanted to point out the fact that I was different from them. And so I think for those two reasons, I didn't really want to be friends with other males. Also, when you're being called, you know, gay or FAGGOT or the queer, like if you're being, because queer used to be a slur. If you're being,
Still is for a lot of people.
Still is.
If you're being called those things, you don't want to be around other people who are like you, because you do not want to draw more attention to yourself for that. I think those three reasons of me not being very exposed to other males, my first interactions with males being negative. I mean, obviously not with the males in my, you know, more distant family, but as far as males my age, mostly was negative. Not to draw more attention to myself. I mean, I did have a boyfriend when I was 10, and we would hold hands in the hallway, so that was drawing attention to some degree. But I mean, just like as far as friends, it was like, no, ew, boys have cooties, you know, like, because while I knew I was male, I didn't relate to that, because everything about my behavior or how people were perceiving my behavior was, you know, so you know, if I did have friends, if Robbie and I were friends back in the day, like,
you would have hated me.
I think it would have been, of course, nice to have someone who could relate to my experience and not, because that's the whole thing is with, you know, with the whole kind of panic at a child's gender non-conforming behavior and then the pipeline down lifelong medicalization. It's like, why are you telling this kid who's gender non-conforming that there's something that is ill about them? Why? And it's like, okay, I as a homosexual person can acknowledge that my homosexuality, if every male behaved on this earth behaved as I do, we would have a problem. Okay, like I can acknowledge as a homosexual that my behavior is not the quote unquote default. You know what I mean? That being said, I'm not going to hate myself for that, but I think I can acknowledge that. You know what I mean? But then to tell a child that their homosexuality or their gender nonconformity requires a medical diagnosis is to say that there's something intrinsically wrong about that or about their behavior. So, you know,
it is erasing the gay, isn't it? I mean, it's a big issue, and it's something which has come up a lot in the UK, transing away the gay.
What was that? The quote from Belle v Tavistock, Isla, as well, where you had the parent who came in and said, I don't want my son to mince, but I want my daughter to run.
Yeah.
And that was, and a clinician heard that and thought, yeah, okay, we'll just keep going. You know, that, I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but you know, that's the sort of thing, and the sort of attitude as well that, you know, I think we have to deal with. One of my questions for you, Drew, is when you're considering this and thinking about all of this in terms of, you know, looking back now, what was the reaction like after you said to people, well, I'm detransitioning, or I'm not trans anymore? What was the reaction like on that?
Yeah, so before I even said anything, I had started like presenting male randomly again. Like I just kind of like you know, and I say presenting male, it's like, I don't know, it's all very subjective. But I would just, you know, it's like funny because I'd still wear like women's clothes. I still wear like women's running shorts to this day. I do, but like I just stopped like I just didn't wear makeup every single day. I didn't wear my wig all the time. I didn't, you know, I just said, oh, like, you know, I look like a boy today and I'm gonna leave the house and I'm gonna be okay with that, you know, like so before I told anyone anything, I just kind of was like, you know, I'm kind of just gonna like wear whatever, and I'm not gonna spend hours ruminating it every morning, you know, like about how feminine I look, whatever. You know, some days still to this day, I can't control that. I still do get a little bit of, I guess, gender, sorry, I know we don't like the word gender here, but I would get, I guess, what you would call gender OCD, where I very hyper fixate on, you know, either my physical appearance, sex characteristics, whatever. But yeah, so I kind of stopped, like I just started kind of presenting more masculinely again. And then after like a week or a couple of weeks, I would start to tell people, you know, like, oh, I stopped taking hormones, or, you know, and there was a period of time where I started like behaving hyper masculinely again, as I did with my freshman year of college, because I was like, you know, I just was so, I felt worn out, because when you're transitioning, and a lot of people don't talk about this, but there's this extremely harsh internal voice that is going on, at least for me. And I've spoken and heard experiences of other trans women, or other people who once identified as trans women speak about this phenomenon. It's this really negative, critical, analytical, internal internal voice.
Yeah.
That's like, you know, and for people, for anorexics, it's like, oh, you just look in the mirror and
all the time.
you call yourself fat all the time. You like grab every part of your body, and, you know, I won't get into it. I don't want to have anyone relive that right now, but you know, it's like there's that for anorexics, and for a lot of trans people, I've heard it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's not to do with, it's the same kind of concept of this extremely critical and OCD like rumination that is, oh, like, you know, for me it was like, oh my God, your muscles look huge, like you look so manly, like, or, you know, it was a lot of calling myself huge. It was a lot of like, you know, telling myself my makeup looked horrible, like, or my wig looked like so like trashy, like, you know, it's just you develop this really, you take on the voice of your childhood bullies when you're
because the thing is, if you can hurt yourself, then you're almost preempting what they could say, because if you hurt yourself first, then you're already prepared for what the hurt they can throw at you. So you're almost like, you know, buttering yourself up for it. It's a real common, there's a common thread in people who've been bullied and abused, basically. Have you had quite a bit of therapy at all, or, you know, counseling and stuff?
Yeah, so I have been in therapy since I was 8, 9. I did struggle coping when I was younger. I was diagnosed with I think just generalized anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder, whatever the general depression disorder is. I think around 8 or 9. And then I was put on antidepressants at age 10, because when I started getting bullied more intensely at school for having a boyfriend when I was 10, I did have some suicidal ideation at that age. And so I've been in therapy at, you know, I'm 21 right now. I've been in therapy most of my life, I can say.
Yeah, that's I'm glad that you're still getting support, because this sounds really very harrowing.
And that's why,
hug.
and Isla, that's why when, you know, I was speaking to Drew about this, and the more, you know, when you're sitting there and you're almost imagining, you know, taking notes, and you're going like, wow, okay. And I got to the point where I was sitting there going, and these doctors asked nothing about this?
No, they just went, oh, here's some, just drug yourself up.
And I honestly sat there and thought, that's because, you know, we hear this in the UK, but I think the US is more captured than the UK, frankly.
For sure.
They call it TERF Island for a reason. They think it's an insult. I'm taking it as a compliment. But on a serious note, I really think it's important that we really do drill down on this, that, here you are, and, you've made it through all of these issues and, serious challenges that you have. And these doctors going, yeah, we'll wave you through. That is something that is just really harrowing, because I think about children who have even more potentially, worrying and damaging disorders, or, situations or mindsets than you do, really damaged mindsets. What happens to them? That's really concerning to me. And it's just, I think the rush through, I think, is so worrying. And that's why, when I heard your story at first, I kind of went, really? It's one of these things that I keep telling people: stop disbelieving what you hear on this field, because the more and more you hear, you go, yeah, that can't happen. And then 5 minutes later, something 10 times worse has. That's the real issue here. I think for some people, it's almost unbelievable. I don't know if you've encountered that, Isla, with things in terms of.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you put it all together. I was wondering, what happened at school? Were they supportive of all of this, or were you taught about gender, transgenderism, or did they have any impact on any of this? Your teachers, or
my college education earlier?
well, school. Your sort of, I guess,
American, the lingo
I
stuff.
know this kind of earlier school part, maybe when you were
Not university though, but you're talking about
college, before uni.
Oh,
not
no.
sure.
So my sex education, all that, didn't include anything about trans. And yeah, I think the first time it was discussed at school was probably when someone asked me if I was trans. I don't know, so we didn't I wasn't really taught about it at all in school. At that time, I think it was really just the culture where it came to me. But yeah, I'm not at school.
Did they support you with your? Sorry.
No, go ahead, Isla. Go.
I was just wondering if they supported you with your sort of the mental health things that you're in, the bullying that you were going through.
Yeah, so at school, I was in the principal's office every week I would get called in and I would be like, oop, am I in trouble? And it's like, oh no, Susie here saw this person do this to you on the playground. And so we just wanted to make sure it happened. So I was always in the principal's office. I was like, oh shit, am I in trouble? It was like, oh no, someone just saw you getting bullied and said something. So we're just making sure it happened so we can get this kid in trouble. It was that and it's funny that I don't know, that's just a funny memory, but yeah. And then my mom was kind of just my she got me in therapy because she knew I was going through a lot. And so I had my support there at home. At school, I was lucky that I had the friends that I had. I was, despite being ostracized, I was still pretty well integrated into social circles in middle school and high school and stuff. Because my childhood friends, I guess, were the pretty girls, the ones that whatever. But so while I was ostracized and picked on and stuff, I did have a good sense. I had backup, I guess. and I had my mom advocating for me for the mental health stuff at home. And so I was well supported there. This was in the early 2000s, this was because I was born in 2001, which to some people is super recent, but to other people is eons ago. And back then it wasn't as, I think if I had that experience, my childhood now, no question I'd be a trans kid. No question because I even in 2014 when I almost I was, and that's why, while I think the inclusion of people who are non-conforming and people who realize they're gay younger than others, maybe, I think it's important to provide those kids with support and do everything you can to make that person feel like they're just as capable as the straight person next to them.
Yeah.
I think there's a fine line between doing that and then between almost giving people an incentive to identify that way. That's why I'm speaking out now is because I think we're past that point of like, okay, we just want the gay and even you know what I mean? Like even kids who are going to end up transitioning. I'm not excluding them here. We want those kids to feel included, but we can't give them an incentive or make it sound cool or trendy to be this way. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, but no.
That's another podcast. That is right there. But today there was something that came past me, which was a poster that in the UK of a school resource, and it was basically had the words, you know, queer and trans and all these different cool people, and it was a whole load of different words that they were showing to kids, and basically they'd removed the words L, G, and B because they were basically erasing gay kids. So it was just, you know, all about trans and queer and all the other letters, I, A, and everything else under the rainbow. There, you know, we're not. This is not going to be done until people start making space for gender non-conformity and allowing and valuing and recognizing that people need to be able to express themselves in whatever way they feel comfortable. So look, so where are you at now, Drew? You know, what's going on for you? How do you feel? You know, you're not on any drugs now, is that right? Or
right. Sorry, on that last point, just about what you said, I wanted to add something. Something I found out recently is that in Southeast Asia, so I think like Thailand, I think that's in Southeast Asia.
Yes,
okay, but it generally in Southeast Asia, the word homosexual they use to describe like the lady boys or like the trans women over there. They use the word homosexual all the time. So I wanted to bring that up because I think this whole issue around the language is really particular to, like, because I would say those Southeast Asian countries are a bit more conservative than, you know, the United States. But as far as the whole language thing, I think it's interesting that over there they can call, you know, a lady boy or a trans woman there, you know, they call that homosexual because at the end of the day, yeah, that's a homosexual person. You know what I mean? But here it's like, you can't, if you call a trans woman a homosexual, it's like, well, no, she's a woman, so she's straight. Like, you know, so I just wanted to like point that out there that we really, in these more extremely liberal societies, that's why we have this like language war thing, is because we're erasing the meaning of some things and changing. It's a very slippery slope into, you know, some form of totalitarianism or something. I don't know. Like,
well, it's nihilism as well. It's nihilism because, put it this way, if we're communicating things, say that Drew and I both sit down and we both say we're queer, what does that mean? What does it genuinely, what does it mean? What does it communicate to the other person? Because you have to have a shared understanding of concepts and constructs to understand what things mean. So for example, when I say woman, most people know what it means. I know there's a few that are going to be oddballs, but let's just ignore them for now. Let's say if I say gay, most people know what that means. If I say lesbian, most people know what that means. If I say queer, what does it mean? I mean, for example, I raised it earlier today, I'm going to use it again. WikiLeaks had a great thing about the guy who dresses up in a maid's outfit. He's a celebrity in Hollywood. He dresses up in a maid's outfit and he whips women, usually escorts, right? But all his friends, because he dresses up in a maid's outfit, are like, oh, you're queer, how liberating. Now imagine if he did that elsewhere. But what's the difference? A maid's outfit? And again, this goes back to, you will laugh, but this is transubstantiation. Really it is. This is a belief in transubstantiation. Really does the body become female once the sacraments are administered. However endocrinologically valid they are in whatever sense, does the body change? And I think that's the problem with the language. And I think, you know, Isla and I have been saying for some time now about language, we need to sharpen up about language, because one of the big problems about discussing this is that there are 101 different ways of saying things rather than one clear thing. And, you know, me personally, you know, I'm now drawing the conclusion, and from what I'm reading, that really it's really well summed up like this. There are men, there are women, there are boys and there are girls, there are homosexuals, there are heterosexuals, and there's bisexuals. Voila. Now, how you are a man and how you are a woman, cool. be that, do it differently. I mean, obviously I do that, cool. I think when you start changing the language, for me, is when you start changing I would say queering the concept, but I don't want to be Judith Butler. But essentially you get the idea. You start administering such a confusion that how do individuals ever clearly communicate on what they mean? And I think that's the real danger. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's one of the big thoughts I have on this about language, is that we really are undermining our language to a point that we can't actually have a discussion with people because people don't know what we mean.
Yeah. And now, like, just the thing about like knowing what does queer mean, it's like, well, now heterosexual people identify as queer, you know, like there are, like, think of the typical, like, what people kind of say, and I know it's kind of redundant, but like the, you know, Caitlyn Jenner, or like someone who's like an autogynephilic transsexual, like, so it's just like a straight person who is trans. It's like, well, is that person queer? Like, because my understanding of queer, as it's been, you know, because when I was younger, it was used as like a negative thing against me. It's like, I thought queer was a same sex, included or pertained to same sex attracted people. But with the transing of our language in a way, it's like, I know people who it's there's a male to female and a female to male in a relationship, and it's like, I have nothing against that, of course. Everyone is entitled to their own whatever. And I'm not shaming these people or anything, but I just think it's fascinating that there's male to female trans and female to male trans that are together, because it's like, okay, well, so you appear as heterosexual, you've both medically altered your bodies. Had you not medically altered your bodies, you still would appear heterosexual. So I think there's, and it's, so I think there's a bigger thing going on here that is, you know, enticing people or incentivizing people to identify this way who may just be heterosexual. That's, I don't know. I think it's all very, I'm sitting back and watching because I'm just at a loss for words for some of this stuff.
Okay,
What I'd say,
I'm going to completely blow your mind then. I don't believe in any of it. Right. I have a visceral response, and there's only actually so much I can take of hearing the words trans woman and trans man before I actually feel like I need to eject my own brain from the top of my skull. You're on Twitter, aren't you, Drew?
Yes.
Do you ever read any Jennifer Billick, or have you read any Sheila Jeffries or Julia Long?
or Andrea Dworkin.
Or Andrea Dworkin, or any.
I'm very new to Twitter. So no.
Okay, so basically, in my school of thought, I don't believe in any transgenderism whatsoever, right? So I will never ever use the terms trans woman for any male, or you know, or for men or whatever, if trans men. I find it incredibly difficult. So if I go into spaces and there's a lot of it, I can only tolerate a few minutes before I actually want to have a stroke. At my age, these are not good things for my body, because I just can't do it anymore. It is because once you start breaking it down and you try to start working out how we're going to actually solve bigger problems, and the schools issue for me is quite a good one to be able to try and, because if people start going, okay, well, how are we going to solve this problem of stopping children from going down this road? The schools issue is a great one to try and illustrate, because actually it doesn't make sense. It doesn't stack up. So anyway, getting back on track, where are you going to go from here, right? You're a young man. You got the whole world ahead of you.
And Posey Parker's called you stunning, so you've really got a compliment. You can put that on your CV.
How are you feeling now? What's your direction, and what's going to happen?
So I'm finishing up my degree. Earlier you said, you know, like you asked, like, what's on from here? You're not on any medication anymore, so yeah. And not only am I not on hormones anymore, but I also quit my antidepressants that I had been on since I was 10. I quit those about a year ago. It's been, I think it's been 1 year and a few days that I've been off of my antidepressants. And that kind of coincides with my like anti medicalism, just in general. But I'm finishing up my human bio degree. I'm really passionate about this stuff, about like how can we help these children that are going through this. So from here, I may potentially continue to try and get my feet wet with conversations like these. As far as more personal life things from here, like I've decided to just let myself be whatever I want to be on that day, while respecting female spaces, while respecting the sanctity of language. Like I guess personally, I feel like I went through this whole journey to kind of realize in the end that ultimately happiness comes from things like altruism, or looking outward rather than looking inward. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to remember how fierce or stunning you look. They're going to remember you for the integrity of your character, and how you treat people, and the things you subscribe to, and the things you support. People are going to remember those things about you at the end of the day, when we're all old, wise, and withered. It's not going to be how fierce, or what if you were giving in the makeup, or in the outfit, or in the body, whatever. So those physical things that's not what matters. It's what's inside. It's how you treat people. Now, that being said, like I'm always going to continue to present femininely, because when I want to, because that's part of me. That's always been part of me since I was a kid, and my behavior. So I'm not going to change that. And I'm also not going to reduce myself to stereotypes. And I think that sends a message to children. I think if I was to medically transition at some point in my life, it would send a message to a child that it's okay that I'm like this because I've done this. Rather than if I was to not medically transition but still continue to present femininely, it would be, this is just how I am, and it's okay, and we don't need to change ourselves. We don't need to. So I bring that up because I think what I gained from this experience more than anything was what kind of person I want to be moving forward, and how I want to leave this earth, rather than focusing on these, material and very vapid and fleeting things. Career-wise, I was going to go into acting or modeling or something, but I then recently I've kind of realized that if I want to do those things, I might have to keep my mouth shut in a lot of situations, because those industries are pretty captured by this right now. So,
and you have the First Amendment, you lucky boy.
Yeah. So I don't want to be, I never want to pursue that kind of career and then be in a situation where I have to bite my tongue on something that I'm really passionate about, such as this topic. Maybe I can do something else. I can use my human biology degree. I worked at a rehab center this past summer as part of a requirement for my undergraduate degree. And, as someone who struggled with an eating disorder and substance use, I think it would be cool for someone to see someone who is, non-conforming in a place like that, because this is something that affects this community at a higher rate. We have higher rates of alcoholism and drug abuse in this community. And so I think it would be very meaningful for me to maybe work there for a little bit. I want to focus on my health. I want to focus on the health of the people I love, and how I can, just try and be, an inspiration to the people around me to be the best version of themselves, and to not let the kind of hot buttons or emotional buttons that both sides of the political sphere are, pressing at daily. It's like, yeah. Whether you watch here in the US, whether you watch Fox News or MSNBC every night, both of them are poking at things to try and make you believe your enemy is someone who it really isn't. And that's why I've faced some backlash from people in my life for even wanting to come online and speak about this stuff in a nuanced way,
Right.
is because me sharing my experience truthfully and having a nuanced conversation about gender identity is for someone to be convinced that me doing so is hateful, illuminates the entire problem of what's happening specifically in the United States with this kind of media culture war. So going forward, I want to try and dismantle that in my personal life with my family and friends as much as I can, and hopefully somehow on a bigger scale, because at the rate we're going, I think it's only going to get worse before it gets better. So,
and one final question from me to kind of very briefly kind of to get it from you. I'm going to do something horrible and cliched. I'm going to welcome to the main stage of Robbie Travers' turf race. On this season, we're going to do the thing that we always do at the end of it in this episode. And you know when the horrible narcissist presents a photo and goes, "Oh look, here's you as a child. Look, yeah, everyone cry. Yeah, I'm not crying. I've got oil reserves." Anyway, what I'm going to do is imagine this is a lovely childhood photo of you. Obviously, I'm not going to embarrass you and do that in real life, but imagine this lovely photo is making you very emotional. Your eyes are crying, or I'm putting onions near you so it looks good for reality TV. What would you tell yourself if you were 14 or 13 now in about a paragraph? What would you say to yourself? And make it good because it's reality TV. We won't watch it. But what would you say to yourself about where you are now, and what does that young kid need to hear?
Oh God, that's a lot of pressure right there. That's a I want to say something articulate, but it's not coming to mind yet. I think I would say there's this quote. It's like God grant me the wisdom to something about like
The serenity to accept the
yes,
things that cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
that quote. That
Right,
quote.
okay. Cut. You're going to say that now.
God grant me the serenity to, what was it?
Accept the things I cannot change.
Accept the things I cannot change.
Courage to change the things I can.
Courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I would tell, I don't necessarily believe in God. I am a spiritual person, but I would tell a younger version of myself that, because at the end of the day, no matter what anyone else says, no matter how anyone, comes at you sideways in life, you need to know that there's things out of your control, there's things within your control, and it's not worth going to battle with yourself to just be at a dead end, so I would tell the younger version of myself also, what doesn't kill you, Kelly Clarkson, a singer over here, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like, and that's just a theme in my life, is I feel like every time I'm faced with adversity for anything, it's like, get through it. You've been through worse, you can keep going. And in that point, the whole thing that people say about, would you rather have a trans child or a dead child? Like, look at me, you know what I mean? Like, yes, it was hard. Yes, it was painful to go through, what I did, but I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
I think it's important to also remember, and I'm going to play the old lady card here, but
okay.
When you're at an age also that it's a real period of learning in your life, going through a lot of change, and it does get better. I remember not being terribly happy until I was about 28, and that was a real turning point. I'm thinking, oh, I can actually cope with life now. Because before that, it was pretty shit and pretty difficult, and I thought, wow, actually, I feel a bit better. I know who I am now. So it's not unusual you're literally experimenting with lots of things and going through a whole load of different things, finding yourself as an adult. And I'm not saying that in a patronizing way. I'm just saying it as a mother. Because, I've really enjoyed your company. You're a beautiful person. I've really enjoyed, listening to you, hearing your story. I feel for you. I'm really, really pleased that you've reached a point, you've found a bit of some kind of peace at the moment. And I'm also really grateful that you've shared this with us. It's really special, Drew. And bless you. you know, for coming and chatting with us.
I think a lot of parents who see this will get a bit of hope from it, frankly. Because Isla works with a lot of parents, and I think a lot of these parents are going to see this and go, maybe there is a way through this. And I think if even that is the case for one child, then this is a very, very, very successful evening, frankly. Really, that's what I would say.
Definitely. Well, look, yeah, Karen.
So I just wanted to say, like, if anyone needs proof that your gender non-conforming child or your gay child or can make it out to adulthood alive without medicalization in this manner, there's living evidence everywhere. There's me, there's Robbie, there's people, life finds a way, and you don't have to subscribe to whatever ideas of our time that are popular to help your child get through that. You can, life finds a way. There's always a way. There's a will, there's a way. That's what I meant to say.
There is a will, there's a will, there's a way. That's a good point to end on. Well, thank you, Drew, and thank you, Robbie. And maybe hook me up on Twitter, and then I can point you in the direction of all of those fantastic people.
Sounds good.
Cheers, Drew.